Hello, my name is Hakon, and today I'm going to do another little tutorial on the Empress Effects Zoia patchable digital synthesizer and effects stomp box. And the idea I had was I was thinking of how I use sequencers on the Zoia, and I thought to myself I tend to use a square wave LFO as a trigger for the gate input. So we've got here a sequencer. It's got a gate input here, and every time it gets a signal on the gate input, it will advance one step. Or not just a signal, I think it needs to be above 0.5, I think. A square wave envelope, sorry, a square wave LFO creates an output of 1 or 0 in the default setting, and the control value is how fast it goes. Now, the default setting for a square wave LFO is to be on half the time and off half the time. And I was thinking to myself, how do I make it do different ratios between on and off? And well, there is an obvious solution to that. But first, I just thought, while I was thinking about that, I came up with other ways of doing the same thing, which may or may not be useful in other contexts. So today I'm going to show you basically 5 different ways of adjusting the gate length. Doesn't have to be a gate, but it could be a gate signal, or it could be a signal used for something else. Just any signal that needs to be either on or off for different lengths of time. There are 5 basic ways of doing it. And there is a 6th way as well, but that's a little bit more elaborate, and I'll go into that in a future video, I believe. So first of all, how do you control how long something is on and off on the Zoia? The most basic way to do it is to create a push button. So we created a push button here. It's a momentary push button. It could have been a latching one. Every time you press this button, this value module over here gets a value of 1. So this is one way that you can control how long something is on and something is off. Sometimes you want to do this manually. So that's one method. Then there's a basic LFO, which only does 50%, 50%. But if you go into the LFO, patched something up there. Okay, so if you go into the LFO, and when you make it or when you edit it afterwards, you can set the swing control, which isn't technically a swing control. It's actually just a pulse width adjustment, really. And set that from off, which is the default, to on. It adds one more pad to the module. And I'm setting this to 0 to 1. So, and this one down here is the value module that's connected to it. And you can see it's lighting up. I'll actually slow this down a little bit just to make it a little bit clearer. But what happens when we change the pulse width of this square wave? So now it is 50, the so-called swing amount. And let's increase it closer to 100. And as we get higher now, see the on ratio is much lower than the off ratio. And we can take it all the way up here to, I presume, or ish, 98.2. Okay, so now it's on for such a short time it doesn't actually show here. You can see it flashing maybe if the, I'm not sure about the frame rate of the camera now, but it does flash. Let's see, it's a little bit unreliable now. Maybe it doesn't always show as, let's increase the speed a little bit. So now it gets a little bit unreliable because of the rounding off, presumably, of some of the values. So let's move it down again. And yeah, this one goes to the minus, so I presume that means that when it's at 0 actually is when it is equal. 100 is entirely off, and minus 100 is entirely on. And a little bit off from that should be, let's see if we get a reliable output there. And again, it does seem to round off a little bit, so we don't get that as easily, that one that is just, let's see now. Yeah, there, now it goes to 0, but not all the time. So not 100% reliable when it gets really close to the ends. But you can use this to either let something be completely on, completely off, or most of the values in between. And because it's an LFO, you also have more control of the speed. So this is probably the best way to control a gate input for a sequencer if you want to adjust the gate length of each step, but not entirely up to 100% or down to 0. So, and why would you need to do this? Well, sometimes you want the on stage of a sequencer to last for longer, for instance. If you are sending the signal to an external device, for instance, the MIDI output module will have a gate output as well as a note output, and some devices indeed will also only use the note on output. As long as it gets a note on output, it also triggers a gate output or input in that case on the other gear. So but there are many reasons why you might want to control that. When I have shown sequences on the Zoia before, I have used ADSR envelopes to control gates in many ways, but that doesn't always work. So if you want to be in full control of it, this is one of the ways you can do it. So you replace the normal LFO that triggers the gate of the sequencer with one that has what they call swing on the Zoia, which basically just means you change the on and off ratios of the LFO. Now we get to the more interesting bits, because now I can show you some alternative ways of doing the same thing. So the first one here is a little bit eclectic, but it has its uses, I think. And this actually needs a trigger to get started. I'll just show you what I've done here now. So this button up here is connected to the stomp switch, and that goes into a trigger input. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't want it to be on for longer than just a moment. So what a trigger does is when it gets a rise in CV values, a control value from an input, it will give you an output only when it gets a trigger. But the problem with the trigger output is it actually is slewed. It goes up gradually and it goes down gradually, which means it doesn't give you a consistent one value right away. So in order for an input that is a momentary button, but you don't want it to be changed by holding it down, you take the momentary button into a trigger, and then you take the trigger into a comparator. Now what a comparator does is it has a positive input and a negative input. As long as the positive input is greater than the value of the negative input, equal to or greater, I believe, the output of the comparator is 1, exactly. So this one, when it is triggered, the trigger output, the trigger module, it sends its value into the positive input of the comparator, which means that once it gets above the value set in the negative input, which is 0.0001, it will output a value of 1. So that means immediately when this button is pushed, the trigger is triggered, and then it sends out a value of 1 to these three. This is one of the ideas I had first, actually, about how to do this. I didn't even think about setting the swing of an LFO right away. I was actually thinking about other ways of doing it, more complicated ways of doing it. So this is the input for CV delay, And the first input here, so it's this CV delay. What a CV delay does is it takes a CV input and delays it by an amount that is set in the second pad here, and then it sends the same value through on the output after that time has passed. So when this one here is triggered first time, the value is sent to this input and it waits for two seconds, and then it goes out here and it is sent to this input of a second delay module, and then it waits another 2 seconds and the output is sent down here. Now, you see the first one here is also sent down here, and this is a sample and hold module. What a sample and hold does is it has an input, which in this case is connected to the second delay module and also to the initial trigger, so that, and then when it itself gets a trigger input on the second pad, it reads the value that is present at the input at that time and copies it over to the output. So this module here, it will get an input of 1 from the first trigger and from the second delay module, and it will get its trigger input from the first trigger, from the first value module and the first delay module and the second delay module. What that does is that every time it's the end of a delay time, it will get triggered, but only if the second delay is the one that is active will it get a value, and also only if you trigger it the first time. But once it has started, once that first trigger has been done, it only gets a value when it gets triggered if it's the second delay module that triggers it. What that means is when it gets triggered by the first delay module, it will have a value of 0 at the input and the output will be 0. When after another 2 seconds the second delay module triggers it, it will have a value of 1 and the output value of the sample and hold will be 1. That means that this value here, the delay time of the second delay module, is how long you want this to be off, because that's the length of time you wait from this one gets a trigger until it sends its value to the sample and hold and switches it on. And the first time here is how long it is on. So this is how long it is off, this is how long it is on. A little bit convoluted, but I'll just show you now just to make this a little bit clearer. So I'm going to trigger it now. So by pressing the stomp switch, and this will start the whole process. And once it has started, it is self-running, so it just needs an initial trigger. So now what happens is it's on for 2 seconds and then off for 2 seconds. And you can see when this one triggers, it switches on. When this one triggers, it switches off. So on, off, and this is, I'm just sending it to a value module over here as well, just to have a consistent look between my pages now. So let's set a different time here. So now if I change these 2 seconds to 664 milliseconds, like so, and now we got an on time of 664 milliseconds and an off time of 2 seconds. So this first one is the on time, the second one is the off time. So this allows you to adjust very exactly how long you want an output, trigger, a gate, or anything else be on or off, if it needs to be on or off exactly the same length of time all the time. Of course, you can also connect other things to these timer inputs to adjust the values dynamically as well. So that's quite an interesting way of doing it, I think, and also it leaves you quite a lot of control. So the only bizarre thing about this one is how you need an initial trigger as well to get it started. Okay, so that's one more way of doing it. Another way is with a comparator. And of course, the principle is the same as the one on the previous page here, where I used a trigger to start a comparator. What you can do is you can send any dynamically changing signal into a comparator, and you just decide what is the value that is going to trigger it to send out a value of 1. So in this case, I've connected an LFO, which is a triangle waveform, which means it goes up and down like a triangle, so just same speed up, same speed down all the time. Which means it goes and of course it's between 0 and 1, so that means it moves between 0 and 1 all the time. And so the middle point is 0.5. It's not exactly 0.5 that's set here. So if I set this to 0.5 exactly, now both the on and the off stage should be exactly the same. Now this output is then sent to a value module again here, just to show consistently the on and off stages. So in order to change this, if I change the comparator value to something significantly lower, like 0.1 now, and you see it is now on most of the time, and then it is off for a short time. And that should be about 90% now, 90% on and 10% off. And the opposite would be true if you go up to 0.9. And of course, now we can't actually see it all the time here. Let's see what we get now. At least it looks like it's still responding. Let's bring it all the way up to 9999. Now it is possible that this actually triggers now, but it doesn't actually show, or it is rounded off because of the timing. Slow this right down. Let's see if that makes a difference now. So if I it's hard to tell for sure, but it looks like perhaps just like the LFO, this is basically the same principle as a square wave LFO with swing control, that maybe it doesn't actually trigger when it is really high here because of rounding off issues. Let's see, now it triggers. And there it triggers. Okay, so that looks more promising. I'll just increase the speed there. Because it will be dependent on speed as well, because when an LFO goes at a certain speed, it will skip values as well, depending on the internal clock speed of the Zoia. So again, just like the LFO with swing control, this is a little bit unreliable once you get very close to being almost on or almost off, and in which case, of course, it will be off and on the entire time. So that's just another way of doing the same thing. And lastly, I thought I'd just show one more way to do this as well. If you want to change the length of the on and off times, of course you could go and have some way of dynamically changing the values of a swing value, of a comparator, of these timings in the on and off stages of the delay module version of this. But you could also use a sequencer to visually show how long the on and off stages of an output value of a gate, for instance, is. And what I've done here is I've just made a let's see, how many, 12-step sequencer. It has a gate input, which is coming from an LFO here, just a normal square wave LFO, nothing fancy, because now it just needs a regular rhythm. Because the output is the gate output here, so we changed the when the sequencer is made initially, normally the default output is a CV value, and if you press the button, the encoder, it changes between CV, gate, and ratchet. So we move it from CV to gate, like so, and then we go in here and we set these values where we want. So now every time there is a gate that is on, that is meant to be an on stage on the output, and every time it is off, it meant to be an off stage. So how do we control that? So what we need again is a sample and hold as the sort of main module for deciding this value output. And I'll put the sample and hold at the bottom here. Now this gets a trigger from, not from the LFO here, but from this module here, and I'll show you the reason why that is the case now. So this is a delay module. So the reason is the LFO, when that triggers the sample and hold, even though this is on for a little while, the sample and hold only responds to the actual first moment of that trigger being on. And that happens the same time as a sequencer is triggered, which means the gate output of the sequencer hasn't been triggered yet. It gets its trigger exactly the same time as a sample and hold, and then it's actually still 0, and it doesn't move up to 1 until after 1.33 milliseconds, which is the smallest resolution, it seems, of time on the delay modules and possibly of the Zoia itself. So this trigger waits 1.33 milliseconds, by which time the gate output of the sequencer has been started, and that value of the sample and hold has gone up to 1 when the delay module triggers it and it copies it over to the output. So this allows us to create a kind of a rhythm gate, which is the same principle that I used in my tutorial on how to create a rhythm sequencer to control the rhythm of another sequencer. Exactly the same principle as that. And I'll just put a link to that video up here just for your reference as well. So there you have it. Those are several equally valid methods, I think, of creating different length or ratios of gate outputs that can be used in different contexts. Although most of the time you can get by perfectly fine by just using the swing control on an LFO, which probably is by far the easiest way to do it. But the other ones are a little bit fun, and also they give you other options of controlling things on the Zoia that you may or may not find useful. But if you do, please leave a like, share and comment if you find it interesting. And subscribe as well if you haven't done so already. There will be other Zoia videos coming out, and if you are interested in the Zoia, if you have got one or if you haven't got one and you're thinking about it, you might pick up something useful that perhaps one day you will be using in your own patches. Usually I'm not really putting that much on patch storage because I'm mostly trying to show basic things, or relatively basic things, that are elements of what you might be using in other patches rather than finished patches with effects and things like that. So I'm probably not going to put this on patch storage either. It's quite straightforward. I think if you watch the video, you can pick out exactly how to make each of these different ways of controlling an output, so that you have perfect control of how long a value is 1, how long a value is 0, the ratio between those two, or the exact timings. Indeed, if you use the delay modules, you can be very precise and have perfect control of it. So thanks for watching, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you next time, where there will be more videos of, well, there will be more Zoia videos at some point. I do have some other ideas, as always, for things I will show on the Zoia, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but there will be something else. Oh yes, I did mention, didn't I, that there was one more way of doing this. Now, what I was really thinking of was that for any of these, for the one with the comparator or the delay modules, you can of course change the values dynamically, and my idea was that I would show you how to do that with a sequencer, but I think you already know how to do that. I'll just tell you quickly. So what you do is you create a sequencer with a CV output, and you set the different values that you want to use for your control of the gate lengths. and you send that to, for instance, the comparator input or to the value inputs of this version, and or to the swing control of the LFO version of you controlling the gate, and that's how you can change it dynamically as you go along. So if you want to try that, please try it at home, and also let me know how that went, if that worked exactly the way it's supposed to. If it didn't, then definitely let me know, because then I'll be more curious and I definitely will make a video about it. But that is the principle of it, and it's I suppose I don't really need to show that. I've already shown you other ways of dynamically altering values. So that's it for now, and thanks again for watching, and goodbye for now. Bye bye.